Today we have 5 people or 5 different sites joining us on video conference. And just so everybody knows, this is being recorded. In addition to that, we have about 50 registrants on Adobe Connect. So I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping with that, just so people know that this is being recorded. In addition to that, in the chat rooms or on Adobe Connect, if you have questions or comments, type them into the chat box and I will relay the question or the comments to Kenthen. And I'm just actually going to introduce Kenthen now. I'm really excited about today's session. I really like the idea of oral traditions and oral history and our traditional stories. And I was actually really quite excited to see Ken at UBC because I've actually never seen him perform, but have seen him in newspapers and different things back home. So when I approached him, I think it was in the fall, we began talking about Kenthen coming to do a presentation to the UBC Youth Circle. And then here we are. You know, it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of planning with scheduling, and I appreciate that you're here today, Kenthen, because, you know, it's time out of your day and time out of your classes to participate with us today. So with that being said, Kenthen, or Ken, is a performer. He captivates audiences with his fascinating retellings of legends of the Secwepemc, his family land, for more than 10,000 years. This is where his late grandmother, respected and legendary Secwepemc elder Dr. Mary Thomas, taught him the traditional art of storytelling. Storytelling for the Shuswap people brought entertainment to the families during long winter nights. It was also a way to keep the history alive, telling important lessons and sharing amusing stories about the creatures found on the land. Kenthen heard from his grandmother how a bear and a coyote found out how to create balance between night and day. And I'm kind of just going to leave it at that because I know that's going to be part of probably today's story. And I'll let Kenthen talk a little bit more about his family, and we'll talk a little bit about his background, how he's learned all of this, going into some storytelling, and where he's at today with his career choices and things of that nature. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I guess what I do want to add to this is Kenthen has performed at the Roots and Blues Festival in Salmon Arm. His past performances have also included stints with the Secwepemc Native Theater, Dreamweaver Theater at Simon Fraser University, Seklep Native Theater, that's in Vernon, right?
Yep.
Caravan Farm Theater in Armstrong, BC, and Shuswap Theater in Salmon Arm. He also appeared in The Voice on CBC's Legend series that appeared nationwide in 2006. He has been involved with the Salmon Arm Roots and Blues once again in 2012, so he's been doing storytelling in the Secwepemc grand opening for the entire festival. He co-wrote, co-directed, and starred in a play for Shuswap Theater called Legends, which had a 22-show run through the summer, and he has been consistently traveling around teaching and telling stories. So Kenthen, welcome to the UBC Youth Circle, and I know you're feeling a little bit sick, and I really appreciate you coming today. We do have a fair group, and I'm glad you came through for us today.
Right on. Secwepemc, Kenthen Thomas, Kisquess. Like Crystal said, I'm from Salmon Arm, British Columbia. I'm a Secwepemc native from the Nisconlith band. My kia and sla'as were Dr. Mary Thomas, Mark Thomas, Herbie and Virag Johnny, and my parents are Phyllis and Jerry Thomas, and I have a 13-year-old son named Susep Sewell Brent. And thank you for having me today. This is pretty exciting. When I first heard that this was going to be webcast all over the place, and the amount of people that would be watching, it was a little scary at first, but I'm sure it'll be fine. So as for stories, I first came across the Secwepemc culture when I was about 13 years old. I grew up in Kamloops, and when I when I arrived in Salmon Arm, I slowly started seeing parts of the culture through basket making, basket weaving. My grandmother would go out into the forest and do some collecting, and being outside all the time, I started going with her on these journeys and learning from her. And then as I grew older, I took a fascination into the creative arts, performing arts, and I started doing some plays in the schools. And then it was probably just before I graduated, this lady from Montreal came along, and she said that she wanted to do some Aboriginal storytelling. So we did some workshopping, and we came across the idea of doing a few Secwepemc stories and bringing them to life via theater in the performing arts. And that's how this all kind of began. I did it with her. I did the performance with her and some other kids from the Secwepemc, and then the elders started getting involved, and they started giving us input and showing us new stories that we could learn. And from that we started getting notoriety, and we were invited as far south as New Zealand and Australia to perform some of these stories. And it just kind of took off for us, and it made us all, especially as kids, really excited. And to be young and to be excited in your own culture was kind of a phenomenon for me. I had never really understood my own tradition or my own culture, so this kind of brought it to life for me.
How old were you?
I was about 18, 19.
Well, you're only 20-something, aren't you? Kidding.
So we did the performances in Australia, and when we returned, we did another summer of it. And then it just kind of, once that lady left, her name was Zabby Smythe. She was from the Montreal, Toronto area, and she was really artsy. And she just kind of disappeared off the grid for a couple years. And me and my cousin Lyle Thomas from Kamloops, we decided that we wanted to continue with this. And one of the things we decided to do was we'd do a two-man show. Instead of putting together a whole cast, we'd do the stories just me and him. And we would act them out through Bear and Coyote. And we had a lot of fun doing it. And then after a while, Lyle kind of dropped off. He started getting married and started getting active with his family and his career. And it just left me. And I was doing all of the storytelling on my own.
So, maybe tell us a little bit more about the family ventures and where the stories come from. Who started telling you the stories? Like, you heard them when you were young from Grandma Mary, or what kind of sparked, other than somebody coming into your life, where did the stories actually originate from? Like, was it the Mesconlith? Was it the Kamloops? Was it modifying and taking the best of everything?
I got the stories. Like, a large part of them were from my Mary, and she told us a lot of them. And when she told those stories to me at first, they didn't really resonate with me. They didn't really have any real meaning to them. They were just stories. But as we got into the performing arts and started seeing the impact we were having on people and how much joy they took out of us doing these performances, they started to resonate with me, and they started to make sense. And a lot of other stories came from Seklep Native Theatre. They had a whole wealth of stories, and I still use some of the stories that I learned there in some of the performances that I do, such as The Animal People Steal Fire. Coyote juggles his eyeballs. I do the Okanagan version. And they said that they received a lot of their stories from elders of the Okanagan as well. I also heard a lot of stories just from my own research, like from the James Tate Chronicles, and looking through looking through all of the artifacts and archives at the Secwepemc Cultural Education Society when I worked there. Just come across a little story that someone had told like hundreds of years ago, and I would memorize it, and then I would share it with other people, and they would all, they would be wowed. They would say, "Oh, I remember my grandmother used to tell that story," but I haven't heard that story forever. And then it just like the story of how Coyote met Secwepemc. That was a really old story, and I came across it again in the James Tate Chronicles, but the first place I came across it was at the archives at the Secwepemc Museum.
So can you share that story with us? That sounds like really interesting. The background of how oral traditions are, our parents and probably our grandparents remember these stories, and it's passed on. And then you say you went into archives, and then back to James Tate, and it's documented there, so that we know that our oral traditions were so important. That if you share that story, maybe yeah, that would be great.
Okay. The way I like to begin my stories is I always like to do it was a long, long time ago. And that's just the way I was taught to tell the stories. And I know there's a reason behind it, but right now it's escaping me. But it was a long, long time ago, a very long time ago, long before the humans came to this world. Coyote was one of Secwepemc's main characters. And he had to do a lot of work for the humans to come, and that was the great grandchildren of Secwepemc. And one of the things that Coyote had to do was find a way to get fire. Another one was to make day and night, and to kill the people eaters. And when he was done all of this work that Secwepemc had asked of him, Coyote was out wandering around, minding his own business, doing what Coyote does, just hunting, being really good looking, and being narcissistic and full of ego, when all of a sudden he ran across this scraggly elder. And Coyote thought he'd have some fun with him, and he went up to him and tried scaring him, and tried having some fun with him. But little did he know that scraggly old fella was Secwepemc, the old one. The old one had returned to the earth to look at all of the work that Coyote and all of the other animal people had done to prepare the world for the humans to come. And when he seen all of the work that had been done, he was really proud, and he was really happy for all of the work that they had done, and he was really proud of all of the animal people. And he saw Coyote coming, and Coyote Seklep walked up to him, and he said, "Well, hello there, White." And the old feller looked up at him, and he said, "White." And he said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Oh, I'm no one." And Coyote goes, "Oh, well, obviously you know who I am. I'm Coyote. I'm Seklep, sometimes even Seklep. And you must have heard of me by now, of how great I am, of how I killed the people eaters, of how I brought the salmon up the Fraser and Thompson rivers, of how I taught man to fish." And he went on bragging and bragging and bragging and bragging, and Secwepemc just sat there with this little smile on his face. And he just listened to Coyote go on and on and on and on and on about his bragging, until finally he looked at Coyote and he said, "If you truly are the Coyote that you speak of, then you must be able to have wonderful gifts that Secwepemc gave you. You must be able to use these gifts right now to do whatever you wish." And Coyote laughed out loud. He let out a big laugh and a howl. And he said, "Oh my," and he started laughing. And Secwepemc looked at him and he said, "Okay, then prove it." And he said, Coyote looked at him, and if there was one thing that Coyote really liked, was challenges. He really liked to be challenged. He liked to prove how good he was. So he said, how do you want me to prove it?" And he said, if you're truly as good as you say you are, see that river over there? I want you to move that river from over there to way over there. And Coyote looked at the river and he started laughing. So with all of his power, he used his power and he moved the river from one side of the valley to the other. And the old man looked at him and he goes, "Ooh, that's wonderful. But if you truly are powerful, maybe you can move it back." So Coyote used his powers to move it back, and Coyote laughed and howled, "Oh!" And he thought for sure this old man would be in awe of his display of power. But the old man just sat there smiling at Coyote, and he looked at him. "What are you smiling at?" And he goes, "That wasn't very powerful." And Coyote said, "Well, now what do you want me to do to prove how powerful I am?" And he said, "Well, if you're truly Coyote and truly as great as you say you are, move that mountain." So he moved the mountain. Coyote used all of his powers to move a mountain, and he tried to move it from one side of the valley to the other. And he focused all his powers up and he moved the mountain to the one side. And then he looked at the old man. "Now what do you think?" And Secwepemc looked at him and he smiled and he said, "Do it again." And when Coyote was just about to do it, Secwepemc, he used his powers to make the mountain stay right where it was. And Coyote tried as hard as he could, and he used all of his powers, and he couldn't make it move. And he looked at the old man, and he was a little ashamed and embarrassed, and he laughed. So he did it again, and he couldn't quite do it. And then he looked at the old man, and the old man just kind of chuckled. So he tried it one last time, and he went, and he couldn't quite do it. And then he sat there, and he was so tired, and he's like, "I don't know what's wrong. I don't know what's wrong." And he looked at the old man and he said, "I don't know what's wrong. I moved the river and I moved the mountain over, but all of a sudden all my powers are gone. I don't know what's wrong." And then Coyote looked at the old man, and then it started dawning on him. There was only one thing that was more powerful than him in his mind, and that was Secwepemc. So he really looked at the old man, and he looked him over, and he sniffed him. And he looked him over and he sniffed him again. And he said, "Secwepemc?" And Secwepemc broke into a little chuckle. And he just went, and then Coyote said, "Oh, it is you. It is you. It is you, Secwepemc, the old one. I haven't seen you in so long, since you gave me my name." And Secwepemc laughed. And then they had a good laugh together. And he said, "Oh, Secwepemc, you're the only one that could trick me." And then Secwepemc, he chuckled, and then he said, "Well, Coyote, the only reason why I'm here was to check on your work and to see how far you've come along in preparing the world for my grandchildren, the humans. And I see you've come a long way and you've done a lot of good work. So now I'm going to let you rest, Coyote. I'm going to turn you into a rock, and I'm going to spread you all over the Secwepemc territory. And that way you can't come back to life," because Coyote was notorious for getting killed and then being able to come back to life. It was one of the gifts that Secwepemc had given him. So to negate this, what he did was turned him into one big rock, and then he smashed him into little bits and put them all over the Secwepemc Valley. And that was the last time we ever saw Coyote, the true Coyote, until we need him again. And that's the story of how Coyote met Old Man.
Oh, that's amazing. What's interesting, what kind of came to mind is there was a lot of little side chat going on the webinar, but we've kind of taken that away right now for now until there is some questions, because part of telling stories is the discipline to listen. That's what I was taught, and I'm sure that's probably what you were taught too, that you said sometimes you it didn't resonate for you, but it all came back to you as you got older. And sometimes in a situation or when stories are being told, that I always thought man, I really wished I listened to my granny or my grandpa and the stories that they told and the songs that they sang. Because later in life, when that all comes back to it, it's really important. It's like, oh, I remember that, or I remember a different version of that. So, is there something about maybe discipline and listening and what you can think of that we can tell now?
Yeah, well, one of the elders, he's passed, and his name was Joe, and he was from the Adams Lake Reserve. And I remember when I first started doing the storytelling, he really liked it, and he started telling me about some of the things about storytelling and the rules and protocols that they used to follow when he was a kid. And he found it interesting that I did the storytelling in the way that I did, because I did it more of as a performance with the headdress and running around acting out the stories. And he said he found it pretty interesting the way I did it, because the way he learned the storytelling practice was that they used to do it in the quiet, and they used to think of it as a winter activity, something that they would do during the winter, during the long cold months, to share stories together. And he said it was not uncommon for people to fall asleep during them, and in fact they relished the idea of people falling asleep during their stories because it meant that they were listening, and they thought of it in terms of they were listening so hard that they became tired from all of the hard listening that they were doing. So that's one of the things that he told me. And he also told me it was and it also taught discipline too, because it meant for children they had to sit and listen, even though they might not be interested or it might not be fascinating to them. Sometimes the message lied in like the final sentence of the whole story, and it wasn't meant to entertain, it was meant to teach. So in that way, in that aspect, I was taught that there were many forms of different stories. There was teaching stories about morals, there were teaching stories about how the world came to be, and they all kind of had some different teaching methods that they brought forth. Yeah.
Interesting. So I guess if you could teach us maybe, or tell us a story about a moral. I think that, those ones are always interesting. And I was actually talking to your dad. Is that your dad? No, your uncle. Our uncle, I guess. And, he stopped by and he was talking about some stories that him and my mom were working on together, and that he actually had an article in the seminar paper.
Oh yeah.
And and I read the article and I thought, how amazing, And he said, I scaled it back, right? In understanding that in some of your research and some of the stories, he said some of our stories actually got really graphic and gory, that he said for the purposes of presentation to public groups, he's had to really scale back and look at an alternative way to deliver the story, because in this day and age, you just don't talk like it used to be talked in our language, even though it would probably be equivalent to a horror story and scaring a child into staying near your parents and not getting lost out in the wilderness. I've heard different stories about, I think it's the Colville tribes, where they talk about the little people, and they talk about, we have our different versions of all these different legends and tales that, as a kid you hear it and you think, oh gosh, I'm going to stay near my parents, or that you hear something drop from the forest and you're picking huckleberries and you're thinking, oh, where are you? Things like that that just were meant to discipline. Get into the forest, get your job done, and kind of the berry collecting, and get out and be safe, sort of thing. Yeah. Respect the animals, things of that nature.
Yeah. A moral story. One that really pops up for me is, especially in the school districts, like when I'm asked to perform at schools, one of the stories that I really like to tell is the story of how Coyote juggles his eyeballs. I like to tell the story because it tells a moral, like, of being true to yourself, being yourself. You know, a lot of times these days we see people trying to emulate others, and sometimes it's not always the right role model that we're trying to emulate. And then sometimes we're trying to, subject ourselves to something that we're not really ready or prepared for. So this story kind of, in a way, it kind of tells the story of Coyote, how he should have just listened to Chickadee, and he would have not gone through this whole process of trying to be and trying to do something that he was not ready for yet. So this is a story of how Coyote juggled his eyeballs. It was a long time ago, and Coyote was out wandering in the forest, and he was walking around minding his own business, doing Coyote things, being Seklep, when all of a sudden he heard out in the distance, out in the middle of nowhere, he heard mama, 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 and he heard it again, mama, 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 mama. And he could hear little laughter, and then he could hear it again, mama, 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 and what is that? So he started walking towards the sounds, and he could hear it again, mama, mama, mama. And as he got closer and closer, it got louder and louder, and it was mama, mama, mama. And then he got closer, and he peered behind this bush, and out in the middle of the field, it was little Chickadee. And little Chickadee was doing the most amazing thing that Coyote had ever seen. She was pulling out her little eyeballs, going, and when she was blind, she would throw them into the air. And as she threw them into the air, she would say, one goes up, one comes down. And they would pop back into her eye sockets. And then she would do it again. She would pop them out. One goes up, one comes down, back into her eye sockets. And Coyote was, wow, he thought this was incredible. And he ran off. He got excited, and he ran off and he found his own field. And he started trying to do it. And he's like, oh boy, I'm Coyote. I can do anything that I want to. I'm going to be the best at this. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to be the best. So he started trying to pull out his eyeballs. So he tried with his right eyeball first, and he started trying to pull it out, and and he started screaming so loud that Chickadee could hear him. All of the animal people in the forest could hear him. And Chickadee, she knew right away what Coyote was up to, that he was trying to copy her, that he was trying to take on a skill that he was not ready, that he had not been taught how to do properly. So she took flight, and she flew to where she could hear Coyote. And she landed, and she looked at Coyote, and she's, oh, what are you doing, Coyote? What are you doing, Seklep? And Coyote looked at her, and he said, I saw you juggling your eyeballs. I thought I'd try. And by this time, he had already ripped out one of his eyeballs, and it was in his hand. It was all goopy and bloody and gross, and it didn't look good at all. Nothing like what Chickadee was doing. And she shook her head, and she said, oh, Coyote. She didn't get mad at him. She just shook her head, and she felt sorry for him. She said, oh, Coyote, geez, you always try to copy people. You always try to steal their tricks and their magic and use them for yourself. But you don't learn the right protocols. You don't learn the right ways to do them. You just do them, and you end up hurting yourself or hurting others. It's not right. So she flew away, and Coyote stood there laughing, and he had his eyeball popped out of his head by this time. And he started laughing and laughing, and he's, oh, she's just jealous because she knows that I'll be able to do this way better than her. So he proceeded to pull out his next eyeball, and he pulled it out, and he got it out finally, and he's standing there, and he's blind, and he throws them high into the air, and all of a sudden all he hears is just, and they landed on the ground, and he's like, oh, what happened? They didn't land back in my eye socket. So he starts feeling around all over the ground, and he finds them, and he throws them high into the air again. And he's waiting for them to fall back into his head. When all of a sudden they go onto the ground. He looks around. He's, oh, darn it. He couldn't figure out what he was doing wrong. So he did it again and again. Every single time it failed. And then he started thinking, maybe Chickadee was right. No, couldn't be. I'm Coyote. I can do anything I want. So he started thinking long and hard, and then he goes, oh yeah, she was saying a little chant when she did this. So he started thinking of the chant the best he could, and he would throw his eyeballs high into the air, and they would go high into the air, and he would start thinking of the chant, Mama, one goes up and one, then it was too late, they landed back on the ground. And then he threw them high into the air again. One goes into the air and the other one comes, and it was too late, they landed back on the ground again. Boom, boom. And then finally, he got lucky after many, many, many tries. He threw him high into the air and he went, oh, God, I'm so tired. I just want my eyeballs back in my head. And he went, one goes up, one comes down. Then, oh, he had his eyeballs back in his head and he was really happy. And he's like, ah, he started laughing. Woo, chickadee, chickadee, chickadee. I can do anything anyone else does. I don't have to listen to Chickadee. So he pulled out his eyeballs again and he went, threw him high into the air. One goes up, one comes down. Got it again. He did it again. So he kept on doing this, but he was getting fancier and fancier as he did them. He'd pop them out, throw them high into the air, and he would spin around, do backflips, and one goes up, one comes down, back into his head. And then he thought, maybe I'll throw them as high as I can. I'll throw them almost to the point where they hit the sky people's land. So he popped them out, and he threw them high into the air, as high as he could. And they went up and up and up and up and up and up. And he watched them, or he couldn't. He just felt that they went way up into the sky. When all of a sudden, there were two crows flying up above him. And they seen his eyeballs go by them. They're, rah, rah, rah. And they were, what was that? And then they started laughing. Were those eyeballs? And then they flew down. They watched the eyeballs fall. And Coyote, one goes up, one comes down. They landed back in his head, and then the crows, they watched Coyote do this a couple times. And then they started thinking, geez, maybe that's how Coyote gets his powers, from his eyeballs. We better steal them and examine these eyeballs. So the next time Coyote popped them up and threw them high into the air, the crows flew after the eyeballs. Wah, 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 and they stole his eyeballs, and they flew away. And Coyote was standing there, and he was waiting for his eyeballs to come back. One goes up, one comes down. One goes up, one comes down. One goes up, one comes down. And they never came back. And he was thinking, oh no, what happened? And he started crying. He started standing there and he's like, oh. And he couldn't cry his eyeballs out because his eyeballs were already gone. So he just stood there wondering what had happened to his eyes. When all of a sudden a little robin came flying down, a little baby robin. She flew down to Coyote, and she said, I saw what happened, Coyote. I saw exactly what happened to your eyes. And he said, what happened? There were two crows watching, and they said that they think that that's where you get your power from, so they stole your eyeballs and they flew away. And Coyote, oh no, what am I going to do? So he started thinking, oh, well, I know what I can do. So he told Robin, come closer, Robin, come a little closer. And when Robin got a little bit closer, he popped out her eyeballs and he threw them into the air. One goes up and one comes down. So he stole little Robin's eyeballs, but they were so tiny he had to squint. He could barely see still. And he's looking around. He looked down at little Robin. Robin didn't know what had happened to her. He stole her eyeballs so fast. She just stood there. Ooh, and she was crying and crying and crying. Coyote didn't have time to comfort her or do anything for her, so he just walked away and left her crying by the creek. And then Mother Robin came flying down, and she looked, and she said, what happened? What happened to your eyeballs? And the mother robin, and then the baby robin told her of Coyote and the crows and how he was juggling his eyeballs. And then Mother Robin said, oh, you can never trust that Coyote. Never trust that Coyote. So she picked up two shiny little black rocks out of the creek, the shiniest the shiniest, blackest rocks she could find, and she put them into robins' eye sockets. And now if you look at a robin, that's why her eye sockets are so black and beautiful and shiny, because of those rocks, because of that day. Meanwhile, Coyote, with his little eyes, with Robin's little eyes, he started looking for the two crows. But his hearing was way better than his sight, so he could hear far distances. And when he started getting closer, he walked in all the directions for a really long time. And one day he could hear rah, 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 off in the distance. Rah, 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 and that was the crows laughing. And he started getting closer. And he started thinking, well, they're not going to trust me, Coyote. And they're too fast. They'll fly away before I can get close to them. So maybe if I change myself, shapeshift, and turn myself into an old lady, they'll trust me. If I turn myself into a granny. So he turned himself into a little granny. And he walked closer to these crows, and he goes, oh, you little crows, what are you doing? And they said, they looked at this, they both looked at each other, rah, rah, and they looked at this granny coming their way. And they were like, well, she's a kia'a, she's an elder, we can trust her. So they started telling her about how they stole Coyote's eyeballs and how they think that all of the power is held in his eyeballs, but they couldn't figure out how to get the power out yet. So she said, oh, well, let me look at the eyeballs. So when they handed over the eyeballs to this what they thought was a kia'a, she looked at him long and hard, and she goes, oh, I think I see how he has his power. And he threw him a little ways up into the air, both of them. One goes up, one comes down. And they both popped back into his eye sockets. And the crows looked at each other, and they went, rah, rah, and they didn't know what had happened. They were, what did that old lady do with our eyeballs? And then all of a sudden, Coyote just shook himself, and he turned himself back into Coyote from the old lady. And the two crows were all of a sudden really surprised. They went, rah, rah, and they started trying to fly away, but Coyote just about caught them both times. And he chased them. And they flew away, and they started laughing as they were flying away. Wah, 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 wah. We'll see you later, Coyote. Wah, 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 wah. We'll see you around, Coyote. Wah, wah. And they flew away. And Coyote, from this day on, has vowed never ever to juggles eyeballs ever again.
See the world through somebody else's eyes.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. There was, Catherine, somebody that had a comment or a question. They put their hand up, and I don't know who it was because I didn't know how to work the system. I answered their whatchamacallit, but I'm...
Somebody asked who the speaker was.
Oh, okay. No, this was when you were out of the room. I just meant to catch up.
The chat back now if you want.
Okay, we're going to open up the chat again because there was some comments that the participants would like to make. Please limit your chat to questions or comments about today's presentation. That would be great. We had to take it away because there was a lot of side chatter going on. And I think with the storytelling, sometimes when you start listening to a story, it's best to listen to it from beginning to end because then you can hear the whole story and the moral at the end, the lesson being learned. Mm-hmm. If there is any... How do you spell the name of the old one?
Secwepemc.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Do you know how to do it?
It's like T.
That's how we do it.
Tkelkupi. I spelled it wrong. Tkel. So somebody asked how to spell Telkupi, and that's Tkelkupki, which we don't want to get confused in our Secwepemc language with Kupi, which is our chiefs, right? Some people make that just because it's very close. There's chief, and then there's like the creator or the old one.
And there's Karma. She's curious whose eyes came out. Coyote's eyes came out, and then he stole Robin's eyeballs, but he stole the whole idea from Chickadee, who was juggling her own eyeballs. It was just something that Chickadee liked to do.
And I guess the moral is be happy with what you have and learn the lesson.
Yeah.
The Coyote rocks mark the Shuswap territory, right? Can you describe the rock for me? Deborah's asking a question about the Coyote rocks marking the Shuswap territory.
Well, they call them the Coyote rocks. Some elders have told me that the Coyote rocks are just reminders when you see them. And if you believe it to be a Coyote rock, it's just a reminder of where we came from, of the sacrifices that the animal people had made to prepare the world for us to come, like the care that they took in preparing Mother Earth for us, and the dangers that they had to go through. And also, not only that, the Coyote rock kind of reminds us of how to behave and how not to behave through the stories that we've that have been shared with our ancestors and our elders, that about Coyote and how foolish and neglectful and hurtful and harmful he was to himself and to others. So and the Coyote rocks, yeah, they're everywhere. They a lot of people, I remember when I was really young, people were telling me that Coyote's rock was only in one place, and then I started hearing arguments that the Coyote rock is in this type of part of the Secwepemc, and then he wouldn't situate himself there, he would put himself here. Then when I heard the story of the old one, I came to realize that the old one had busted him up into so many parts, into so many littler rocks, and put him all over the Secwepemc Valley, so he wouldn't be able to come back to life, because he had a weird ability to come back to life. And that's the last thing that Te Kaukupki wanted him to do. He wanted him to rest and to be ready for the next time that the world needs him to come and help Mother Earth again. And that's just the stories and I guess a little prophecy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, the chatter that's going on right now, the talk, is about the tales, and I think if you could explain maybe a little bit more about why stories were told, because, the shape-shifting, grasping that concept, as you can see, I can see you smiling, and,
Yeah.
Yes, the eyeballs were given back, and
He didn't give Robin's eyeballs back.
Oh, he didn't give Robin's eyeballs back.
He kept them.
So he had two set of eyeballs.
Yeah, and what was that other question? There was one back there. It was kind of funny.
Okay, it was. Or did he keep them? Okay, how did he do it? Do all chickens' eyes come out? Chickadees, I guess.
Yeah, chickadees. I don't know. I think that's. All of the stories come from somewhere. That's something that I'll have to look into. Maybe there's probably a reason why they said that he juggles his eyeballs.
So Coyote.
Oh, who turned into the old lady? Coyote did. He shapeshifted into the old lady. He knew that the crows wouldn't be able to trust him as Coyote, and that he would need to disguise himself somehow. So he transformed himself into a kia'a, and the crows were able to build trust in the kia'a. They had no other reason to, because she was an elder, and they trusted instead of Coyote being Coyote.
Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of talk about the story going on. So I'm kind of wondering a little bit more about Coyote, and in our history, and probably in other people's languages and history, that he was probably known as like the trickster. Like, do you know how? If there are any more stories about crows stealing things, so there's somebody interested in that, and somebody saying that I like your stories, that they're funny, and there are stories, right? There are stories, and that's what we're hoping, is to bring that oral tradition back, right? That's why, Ken, I'm imagining you got into this area of storytelling, is the stories need to be told, and we need to be retelling these stories because they're ours. They belong to us, and and I appreciate this because this is the first time I'm actually hearing these stories, and it's amazing. So how about Coyote becoming trickster and and maybe it's for the first time some of you are actually hearing about shape-shifting. Like I remember the first time I heard about shape-shifting, kind of grasping the concept that in our legends that you go start as a coyote and you shapeshift into this and then you shapeshift back. Like, I mean, even personal experience, when you actually experience it yourself for the first time up in a mountain, it's really amazing. At first I was kind of scared, but then I thought, no, that's what the animals do. That's what they were put on this earth to do, is like the shapeshifting and things of that nature. Are Coyote rocks kind of like the hoodoos? Thank you.
I think so. I think a lot of we're like I stated before, the Secwepemc put the rocks where they were pretty visible, so that way we would always be reminded of Coyote and the work that he did and how to behave and how not to behave. So yeah, they're pretty visible, and hoodoos is sometimes one of the things that he put Coyote's rocks on top of. Mm-hmm. Some of them, yeah, that's exactly what I was told.
So Karma is saying, I've watched a show on Raven Tales of how the coyote tries to fly, and he was red. He jumped off a cliff and turned into a dog.
Huh. I've never seen that one.
It's probably on APTN. So I guess, story of creation, right? The stories that you tell are so interesting. A student was asking if Kenthen knows the story about Coyote and Raven on who is the better trickster.
I don't know that story. I've heard of it, but I think they're pretty close. I did a show with a Dreamweaver Theater, quite a while ago, and there was a raven involved in the story, and they kind of had a battle of wits and a battle of skills, and they were pretty close. But I'm pretty interested in to see that story, the story of Raven and Coyote.
Alrighty, so there is a question. Can you tell us another story?
Yeah, I have a story of Crow, and that's the story of it's pretty much the story of why Crow's black. You see a long this was a story. It was great because I have an Okanagan version of how the animal people stole fire. And I went up to Lac La Hache, and I told the story. And I told the story of how the animal people stole fire. And she really liked it, this little girl. She kept on telling me how funny it was and how much of a great job I did and how happy that I was there. And then I said, thank you. And she goes, well, can I share a story with you? And then I said, yeah, certainly. And she proceeded to tell me the story about the crow, and how she heard the story about the crow and how it stole fire. And I just absolutely fell in love with this story. You see, a long time ago, a very long time ago, the humans, they decided that they are the animal people. They decided that there needed to be fire for the humans to come. And this was a creation story. And so the animal people started thinking of ways that they could get fire. And all of the ones that could fly, they started flying high into the air. And they flew as high as they could, and they flew as close to the sun as they could get. And they thought, well, that's where fire is. And they got close and close and close as they could, when all of a sudden it would get too hot for them, and they'd return to Earth, and almost having all of their feathers burned right off of them. And so None of the animal people that could fly could get close. And then Crow, he was the last one to go. And at the time, a lot of people believed before this story happened, they all believed that Crow was one of the most beautiful birds, and he was the most tastiest. And Crow was always scared of getting eaten. And he thought, well, geez, maybe if I do something good, people will stop wanting to eat me all the time. So he flew as high as he could towards the sun. And he thought, I'll get fire today. And he flew as high as he could. And he flew as close to the sun as he could get. And he couldn't quite make it. And he returned to Earth. And he went straight for a lake and he cooled off. And then he tried again. And this time he got a little bit closer. And then he flew back to the water. And he cooled off. And then he flew a little bit closer. And each time he would fly to the sun to try and get fire for the humans. He would get just a little bit closer, and he'd return to the water to cool off. And he did this for a long time that people even forgot that they were trying to get fire. Until finally one day, Crow left from the water, and he went straight for the sun, and he got so close that he was actually able to grab fire this time. And he flew back to the earth. And when he landed, he put the fire down, and he was all black. He flew so close to the sun that he had wrecked his beauty. He was no longer as beautiful as he once was. He was black and kind of all shriveled up, and he burned all of the beautiful feathers off of him, and he was just all black now. But to Kelkupki, he had watched him, and he had seen how much patience he had practiced, and how much resolve he had, and how determined he was to get fire. And he gave him a gift. He said, I know that you're always worried about people, that you're always worried about others eating you. Well, I'm going to give you a gift today. I'm going to make you what we call a garbage bird. All you're going to do is you're going to eat the waste of others. And that way, people will no longer want to eat you. So that's how Crow became the one that eats the waste of others, and no one wants to eat him anymore. It was a gift.
Somebody's asking, do crows taste good?
Well, I'll never know.
I don't know either. I've never tried crow either.
And that's the reason why.
I guess that's interesting, because you think about, in the English language, what's the saying? Do you something about eating crow?
Yeah.
When you make a mistake and you want to take
crow.
all your you eat crow, right? That you just eating garbage. You just want to stop from saying what you want to say. So you think about the tales and how they even relate to. You take that whole concept of the story you just told and some of the sayings, right? I never really knew what the meaning was, eating crow, right?
Yeah.
It kind of makes more sense to me now. So I guess what I was looking at was there was a question back here. Kelly, sorry Kelly, I think I may have missed your question back here. They were asking about, he wanted to know who to know those people's eyes that popped out. I guess it was Coyote?
Yeah, Coyote. Well, Chickadee popped her eyes out, and then Coyote copied her, and Chickadee just couldn't understand why Coyote would want to copy her when he hadn't been taught in the rules or the protocols, and why he always needed to try to be better than everyone else. And it kind of made her sad, so yeah, it was just Coyote and Chickadees, and then he popped Robin's eyeballs out, but Robin kind of went out at the end. She got beautiful new eyeballs with the power of her mother, so
The black
shiny eyeballs. So if you ever look at a robin, you'll see the black shiny eyeballs, and that's why. It's because of the creek rocks.
Mm-hmm. So interesting, very, very interesting stories, and hopefully the students and all the participants are actually enjoying the stories. And I know, like you say, that you've performed these stories on stages and in front of live audiences. So hang on. Somebody asked, couldn't Coyote just use his powers to make some new eyes? And there is another question right behind that. So it'd be interesting. You know, they're very interesting questions because of the powers that were given to Coyote. Why couldn't Coyote just make a new set of eyeballs?
Ooh. I don't know. I've never even considered that. I just heard the story the way it was, and I never even thought of that. Perhaps he could. Maybe he was just more interested in finding his own. He's pretty possessive. We'll say that.
Yeah, I guess it's like losing, you know, your phone. You want your phone back. It's your connection to the world, right? It's you want your what belongs to you rightfully back, I guess. Kind of what it boils down to. And I think the lesson is when he got them back, he was going to keep them and not juggle them anymore. Like, be happy with what the creator of the Telkukpi gave to him. I think, you know, there's so many different interpretations. I think it's what you take away from the story being told. Mm-hmm. What it means to you personally, right? I mean, there's probably always going to be these what ifs. Why couldn't he do this? Kind of like any movie that we watch or any story that we read. Well, if they would have made a decision back here, it'd have a different outcome. But the stories are told kind of in such a way that you probably take the best and what you learn from the story being told. So, Deborah is asking, wondering if you know why Weasel has a brown stripe on his tail.
No. No, I don't.
So Karma is saying, I seen this other show on how this native stole the stars, moon, and the sun, and he was so greedy, and the raven stole it. Is there more than just 2 stories you have? And then Deborah said, love your stories. Please tell us another story you learned from Granny Mary.
Okay. Yeah, I do have more than 2 stories. I'm just thinking of one right now that will be seeing if I could think of one with Coyote involved. Okay, I'll tell the story of how Bear and Coyote made day and night. This is a story that we first did I first heard it from my grandmother Mary, of course, and but also it's been in a couple of publications from the Secwepemc Cultural Education Society. And I've done the story with many people. I did it with my brother Troy Thomas, and my cousin Lyle Thomas, and they played the bear with me. And it's always a great story to tell. It really seems to get to the little kids, especially when we act it out on stage. The young ones really like the liveliness of the story.
Would you like to jump up and maybe?
You see, it was a long time ago, a very long time ago, before the humans came into this world, and Brother Bear and Brother Coyote, they kind of lived in the same neck of the forest together. And Brother Bear, he was wandering around, and he had eaten his fill. He had eaten all of the food that he could possibly eat. And the one thing about Brother Bear that you all need to know is that he only likes to do one of 2 things. One is eat, and the other is sleep. And since he was full, he had no more room in his belly for more food. He decided that this was the time to sleep. So he lied down in the darkest part of the forest that he could find. And he lied down and he tried to go to sleep. But at this time of the earth, the sun and the moon, they didn't really have any rules to follow. They didn't follow the same rules that they do today. So they would just pop up and shine whenever they wanted to, or they would make it dark whenever they wanted to. And they would go as fast as they wanted to. They did whatever they felt they needed or wanted to do. So they didn't have any real rules. So the sun, woke up one day, and it seen Brother Bear sleeping. So he thought, maybe I'll have some fun with Brother Bear, and I'll wake him up. So he shone his light down on top of Brother Bear. And Brother Bear was sleeping away when all of a sudden he looked up and he could see that light from the sun. And he squinted his eyes and it made him angry. So he ran out and he looked up at the sun and he growled at the sun. And usually the sun, or usually anyone that Brother Bear growls at, they become terrified. They run away. And they Brother Bear doesn't see him for a long time because they're so scared because of Brother Bear's growl. But the sun didn't even move. It didn't do nothing. It just stayed up in the sky. So Brother Bear, he looked up at the sun and he walked away and he found a darker place to go to sleep. He found a big canopy of trees and it was so dark in there he thought, well, that sun will never be able to find me this time. But the sun searched all over the earth for Brother Bear. And when he found him again, he shone his light on top of Brother Bear and Brother Bear woke up. And this time he ran out and he looked at the sun and he growled so hard and loud that he thought for sure he would scare the sun away forever. And he went, and he screamed at the sun. But the sun was not afraid of Brother Bear. It was not afraid of Brother Bear at all. So Brother Bear, this time, he said, well, the only way to solve this is I'm going to find a place so dark, the sun will never find me. So he found this dark place, and he lied down, and he went to sleep. And the sun searched for him for so long, and finally he found him. And he shone his light on top of Brother Bear. And Brother Bear woke up a third and last time. And this time Brother Bear didn't get mad and didn't run out and try and scare the sun. He just walked out of his darkness and looked up at the sun. And he said, today I'm going to make that sun go away forever. So he started thinking long and hard about what he could do to make the sun go away. And the first thing he thought of was, maybe I could throw a big rock at the sun and knock it out of the sky. So he picked up a big rock and he threw it at the sun. And the rock went up and up and up and up and up and up. But it came back down to the earth. And Brother Bear said, well, maybe that was too heavy. So he picked up a tree and he threw that at the sun. And it went up and up and up and up and up. But it didn't even come close to the sun. And then it landed back on the earth. And then he was just about to give up, when all of a sudden he remembered that the Kalkuki, the old one, had given him the gift of song. So he thought, well, I'm going to find my drum. And I'm going to sing a song so powerful it'll make the sun go away forever. It'll be darkness for all time. So he started thinking of a song long and hard. And he started singing, oh, darkness, darkness, darkness. I like the darkness. Darkness, darkness, darkness. I like the darkness. Darkness, darkness, darkness. I like the darkness. And then he started singing so hard and so fast that his big old jiggly bum was jiggling more than it had ever before. Darkness, darkness, darkness. I like the darkness. Darkness, darkness, darkness. I like the darkness. And then all of a sudden it was dark. It was dark for forever. Meanwhile, Coyote was out wandering, doing coyote things, minding his own business, just galloping around the countryside, when all of a sudden the sun was gone. Coyote looked up and he started thinking, ooh, that's weird. The sun usually just doesn't disappear from the middle of the sky. Usually the sun goes over behind some mountain and goes to sleep over there. It's weird that it just disappeared out in the middle of the sky. So he started thinking, and it's so dark. And he started going, whoa, boy, I better figure out what happened here. That doesn't seem right at all. So he started trying to yell around, see if anyone was nearby. He couldn't see anything. It was so dark. So he started howling. No one answered him. So he howled again. And no one answered him. But off in the distance, he thought he could hear some laughter. And he's like, that sounds like my brother Bear. I better go see what he's up to. So he started sniffing around. He's going to find Brother Bear's scent because he couldn't see. He had to use his other senses to find Brother Bear. So he listened for his laughter and he would sniff in the air. And then finally he could smell Brother Bear. And he thought maybe that's because he's so stinky that he found his scent so quickly. So he sniffed him out. And he found him and he was in the middle of the field laughing away. He could hear him. And Brother Bear was, whoa, he was laughing and laughing. And Coyote ran up to him, and he's like, and Coyote runs up to him, and he goes, he's going to start asking him questions, but Brother Bear just grabbed him, and he is laughing away, and And I don't know if you've ever seen your cousin or your brother or your sister or your uncle or someone, they're just laughing and laughing. You don't even know why they're laughing, but you start laughing too because it's so fun to laugh. So Brother Bear was laughing and he grabbed Coyote, and Coyote was sitting there and he's trying to talk to him, and he's, what do you laugh? And Brother Bear laughed, and Coyote laughed, and they just laughed and laughed. They're standing in the dark laughing like two fools. When all of a sudden Brother Bear stopped laughing and oh boy. And then Coyote looked at him and he goes, oh boy. Oh, what are we even laughing about? And then Brother Bear started laughing again. Oh, my brother, you wouldn't believe it if I told you. And Coyote said, try me. Tell me what you're laughing about. And he goes, well, so he proceeded to tell him the story. He told him the story about how he ate all of the food he could, and he went to sleep, but the sun had awoken him. So he growled at the sun. And then he told more of the story about how he went back to sleep. He found a darker place, and then the sun found him again and awoken him. So he ran out and growled at him again. And then he told more of the story about how he went and found the darkest place he could find to sleep, when all of a sudden the sun found him, and he ran out and threw a rock and threw a tree, and he couldn't figure out how to make the sun go away. And then he remembered he was given the gift of song, so he sang a song, darkness, darkness, darkness. And then he made the sun go away forever. And then he proceeded to laugh again. Ho, 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 ho. And Coyote, right away, he looked at Brother Bear through the darkness, and he said, brother, what you've done here is wrong. Although you don't like the sun, you can't make it go away forever. We need a balance in life. We need the good with the bad. And although the sun is bad for you and your sleeping habits, it is good for Mother Nature. It provides life. It provides the plants with food to grow. It provides heat for the humans. It provides so much for Mother Nature and for the humans to come, and for even us, that we need the sun. It's a part of our life. We always need the good with the bad, and we have to find ways to compromise and deal with them. And more importantly, Coyote told Brother Bear, if Secwepemc finds out about this, he'll probably blame me. So we need to fix this. So Brother Bear, he said, no way am I allowing you to fix this, Coyote. And Coyote said, we have to fix this. So Coyote started thinking, well, if he sang a song so powerful to make the sun go away, I can sing a song powerful enough to make it come back. So Coyote started thinking of a song, and this is a song he came up with. Light, 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 light. I like the light, 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 light. I like the light. I like the light. I like the light, 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 light. I like the light. And then the sun was back. Brother Bear squinted and looked at the sun. The sun was back, and he started singing his song to make the sun go away. Darkness, darkness, darkness. I like the darkness. And the sun was gone again. And then Coyote started singing his song, light, 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 light. And then it was back. And then Brother Bear sang his song, darkness, darkness, darkness. Light, 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 light. Darkness, light, darkness, light, darkness, light, darkness. And it went on and on and on. The sun would come up, and then it would go. And the sun would come up, and then it would go. And then the sun would come up and go. All of the animal people were so confused, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know whether to go to bed, get up, go hunting, start their daily chores. They didn't know what to do. And if you thought I was confusing about them, the poor moon. The moon, every time the sun goes down, the moon comes out. And every time the sun would go down, poor moon would pop his head up with his big round face. And then the sun would pop back up and, oh, you're already back? Oh, well, not me, not my turn? Okay. And then he would go back down. And then he would pop up again when the sun would go down right away. Oh, you're already back? Oh, okay. And the moon was just as confused as everyone else. And then finally, back on Earth, Brother Bear tried singing again. Dark, dark. He couldn't even sing. And Coyote tried singing, light, light. And they couldn't sing. Neither one of them could sing. They had no more energy left. And then Brother Bear came up with the best idea that he's ever had in his whole life. He looked at his brother Coyote and he said, what do you say we go in half? And Coyote looked at him and he goes, half? Like you said, like you talked about, life is a compromise. You have to take the good with the bad. But if we can make half good for me and half bad for me, that would be. And Coyote looked at him, you mean half dark and half light? And Brother Bear said, ma'a, ma'a. And then he said, oh. And then Coyote gave it some deeper thought. And he goes, you know, from the time the sun rises and it goes all the way across and completes half a circle, we can call that day. And from the time the sun sets and the moon rises and we complete that circle, we can call that night. And that is how Brother Bear and Coyote made day and night.
All right. That was an interesting one. So what's interesting about that and creation and, you know, some of the stories that you've told, we're just turning the chat back on. So if there's comments or questions about that, the creation of day and night with Bear and Coyote, we'll just give people a few minutes. And I'm not sure if some people have to go back to class because some classes join us for about an hour. So I know we've lost a few attendees probably because the class time changed, but we try and make sure we keep it for, you know, from that 10 o'clock time frame. So I do understand that, you know, there's class changes and things of that nature. We do have Kispioks who we can only probably hear their video. I'm not sure if anybody has any comments in the rooms up there. Lori is asking, do people hold on to animal totems as guides in their lives?
I think so. I think a lot of people like to have that belief, and some people, I even, like in my travels and doing the storytelling, some people have told of recurring dreams and sightings of animals that they've had. For me, I like to just because Coyote's so close to me and I've performed him so much, whenever I see a coyote when I'm out driving or in the forest, it kind of always entices a little bit of excitement for me. And I'll say a few words, you know, a few good words like hello coyote and hope you're doing well, and yeah, I guess in a way he is kind of like, I like to think of him as my totem. So yeah.
I think so too, because Lori, when we were revitalizing, you know, the language through the child care center, through you know, implementing language immersion into our band operated school, and you know, hiring the Aboriginal support workers in the school district, in our band, we were choosing names for ourselves, whereas the coastal, you're handed down a name. But part of that was the idea of revitalization and bringing names into back into our culture and into our band. And mine, you know, Kenthen has shared that his was the coyote. Mine is actually the wolf. So when we were asked, when we sat down with the elders or our mom, who is an elder of our family, we just talked about who we felt our spirit guides were. And right back to probably, I don't know, the age of 22, I always felt really a strong draw to wolves and just their power and their connection to each other, how, you know, when they find their mate, you know, that like that's it for a wolf. So I guess in that sort of respect, I'm in agreement with Kenthen about totem guides as us, because that's actually my interior Salish name is Malastia, which means wolf in the Splatchin dialect, and I'm not sure what the version are across the Shuswap nation, but yeah, so I think you know, and I was told that if I felt I ever outgrew that name, that at the one of the future name givings, that I could talk to the elders about that. So I do believe, you know, that my house is actually filled with wolves, and prior to that, I really felt a draw to the white buffalo, the spirit and the kinship that I was drawn to that. And I actually did go to Yellowstone quite a bit, and I would, always look for the wolf, but go in and look at the different observatories that they were re-implementing the wolf back into Yellowstone Park and following those stories. So yeah, so I'm in agreement with Kenthen. And I guess, Lori, you have a second part to that question. Jolene is saying, our class is really enjoying the legend. Please tell more. I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep up. They're typing really fast. Was anyone allowed to make a story or relay a story?
That's a good question. Alan, in my learnings, elders have told me that that pretty much there was always storytellers in the Secwepemc, and my grandmother, she used to always talk about like how she remembered when the storyteller was coming, that they would provide some of the, they would take out some food and they would get all prepared, because it was kind of like the newspaper or the some good tidbits of information that was coming down, and he always had new stories to tell, he or she, and they would pull out their best food and get really prepared for him when they heard he or she was coming. But as far as having the storytelling, I think anyone can do it as long as they follow. There's certain protocols that I know my nation has about the stories. Like they're kind of protective over some of the stories that have been told and that have been lost, and so they don't want the stories to be generated into something that's detrimental to the nation or to the people, and I've even heard terms as Disneyfied. They don't want to see a Secwepemc story without the authorization from the elders or from the chiefs, the Kookies, that one of the stories all of a sudden become, intellectual property of, Disney or some other person that's outside of our family or our nation, Mm-hmm. But I as for having storytellers chosen for us, with some, I've never really heard of that. I've just heard of people choosing to tell stories, and they're good at it. People listen to them, so they follow that path.
So Lori, thank you. I have my spirit and animal guides. They give you strength. That's great. And you're welcome. I do try and share my personal experiences as well. I guess they're wanting to know if they could share the stories. And I guess Alan further states, thank you very much. The intention is to help, support, and give meaning, and thanks for our lives. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Stories is the art. When I first started doing the performances of stories, I think Spirit Song Theatre, they were doing the kind of the same thing down here in Vancouver, and which transformed into Seklep Native Theatre. I think it was lost for a while, but I think it's kind of a new phenomenon that's coming around again. I'm starting to see younger kids now doing little skits of some of our Secwepemc traditions and storytelling. And I've even had the opportunity to help teach some theater skills and to teach some kids some stories, and then they performed it for their communities or their families. So, and they were more than happy to learn. They were willing participants. Whereas when I was in high school, a lot of kids were shy, and they wouldn't do it with me. They mm-hmm. wouldn't perform with me. But now I see a lot of young kids getting involved and having fun.
And I think that's great, because the more acceptance, I mean, back when I was even in high school, there was very little Aboriginal content. You're sitting in history class or just listening to, history, but there wasn't the oral traditions. There wasn't a lot of Aboriginal support workers in the system, and now we've seen a whole emergence now, that it starts from the Head Start programs, the daycare programs, into the kindergarten, and in band operated schools, into the public system. So we're getting a whole array of, yes, it's who we are, we should be proud of who we are. So there's been a whole shift in the school system and the thinking. I guess what I'm looking at is the time and being cognizant of everybody's time. I was just looking, Suzanne is asking, is there a story that teaches sexual respect? I hope that you create one with the protocols, because I appreciate your storytelling talent and knowledge.
That's, in the old stories, like the really old stories, like the ones that you hear from the elders, the graphic stories, the ones that Crystal was speaking of earlier, that my dad and, was it your
Uncle,
mom?
your dad. And your
That
uncle
they were
and mom.
speaking of, the ones that the elders tell of. The Coyote was a very sexual creature, and he did a lot of harm with his sexuality. But looking at that message there, I think that would be a good opportunity to start bringing up some of those issues and to start looking at a way to bring those stories out in a healthy way to teach about sexuality and
Sexual
such.
health.
Yeah, sexual health. Yeah.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Suzanne. So what I was looking at is I always try and ensure that we're everything we've advertised. There was one story on the advertising that I'm hoping we can get in before the end of our session, and it had to do, I think it was with Bear's tail.
Oh, how Bear lost his tail?
Yes, how Bear lost his tail.
Okay, I remember it. Okay, it was a long time ago. It was a very long time ago. And Brother Bear was out fishing. And he was fishing salmon. He was the best fisherman in all of the land. All he would have to do is just with one swipe, he'd swipe salmon out of the river and onto the beach into a big pile. And Coyote was so hungry and scrawny. He wasn't able to hunt as well as he used to. He got a little bit sick over the summer, and he got lazy afterwards, and he just didn't do all of the collecting that he needed to. He didn't feed himself as well as he should have. But he was sitting there and he was watching Brother Bear get all of the salmon. He thought to himself, well, that's way more salmon than anyone should need. So I'm going to find a way to steal that salmon from him. I'm going to find a way to trick him out of that salmon. So Coyote started thinking long and hard about a trick, a way that he could get this salmon for himself. And he was walking around he walked up into the mountains, into the high part, away from the creek, and he was up at the lake. And he started realizing he was walking, and then he started realizing that he was walking on the water. It had become frozen. And he looked down at the water, and he stamped onto the water, and his foot fell through the water. And just about as quickly as his foot fell into the water, it got cold, and he could see the ice forming around his foot. And he pulled it out, and there it was. He had his idea. So he went back down to the river, where it was a little bit warmer. It was the fall time, the time when the leaves were falling off the tree. And he walked over to Brother Bear, and he was fishing all of the salmon that he could out of the river and making a big pile. And Coyote came walking up to him, and he goes, "Oh boy, I'm so full. I'm so full from all of the salmon I ate. Boy, I'm the best fisherman in all of the land." And Brother Bear looked at him, and he tried ignoring him, but Coyote kept on bragging about how great of a fisherman he was, and about how he could fish all of the salmon and all types of fish, any kind of fish that you could think of. Coyote could do it. And then Brother Bear finally got tired of hearing about this. Finally got tired of hearing of Coyote's bragging ways. So he walked up to him and he said, "Oh, Seklep, why don't you just leave?" And then Coyote said, "Oh, I'm going to, but I I'm going to go back to my fishing. And then Brother Bear said, yes, you go back there. And then he goes, oh boy, that's a mighty fine pile of salmon you have there. And then he goes, Brother Bear looks at him and he goes, yes, that is. I'm the best fisherman in the world. And then he goes, I don't think that's true, Brother Bear. And then he goes, how could you be the best fisherman in the world when I just told everyone? I just told you and everyone that I'm the best fisherman. Brother Bear looked at him and he started laughing. You see these paws, Brother Coyote? They're a bear's best friend and a fish's worst enemy. With one swipe, I can take salmon out of the water. And then Coyote started laughing and laughing. And this made Brother Bear angry. Brother Bear looked at Coyote and he goes, so what makes you think you're a better fisherman than I am? And Coyote looked at him and he goes, do you really want to know? Do you really want to know how I'm the best fisherman? And then Brother Bear said, yes, that's why I asked. I'm getting fed up with you, Coyote. And then Coyote started laughing. He goes, okay, well, here's the deal. I learned a trick from Secwepemc, the old one, how to be the best fisherman in the world. So, if you want to learn my secrets, I'll trade you for your pile of salmon. And Brother Bear looked at his big pile of salmon that he had worked hard and long for. Then he looked at Brother Coyote. And then he looked at his pile again. Then he thought, well, if Secwepemc taught him, the old one, then it must be a good trick. So he thought, well, and Coyote said, nope, don't tell me yet. How about you sleep on it tonight, and tomorrow morning you meet me before the sun rises, and you bring all your salmon up to the lake on top of the mountain, and then we'll talk up there. So Brother Bear said, okay. So next morning, Brother Bear piled up his salmon, and he walked up the mountain, and he met Coyote in the middle of a lake, and it was frozen. And he looked around, and he saw Coyote out in the middle of the lake, and he had his tail stuck in a little hole in the ice. And he was just kind of squatting down, and he was looking around in the darkness. It was just about sunrise. And then Brother Bear walked out to him and he goes, what are you doing? And Coyote looks up at him and he goes, oh, you startled me. I didn't even hear you come up. And he goes, oh, me? I'm fishing. And Brother Bear looked at him and he goes, how are you fishing? You have your tail in the hole in the ice. And he goes, exactly. You see, Brother Bear, this is the method that Secwepemc taught me. But there are rules. You have to leave your tail in the hole in the ice all day and all night, and then you'll catch all of the fish that you will ever need. But you need to leave it in there all day and all night. Otherwise, you won't catch anything, and you'll have to start all over again. So Brother Bear looked at his pile of salmon, and he goes, well, this can't be true. And then Coyote took his tail out, and he goes, go ahead, use my hole. Use my hole and stick your tail in there. And at this time, Brother Bear used to have a big, long, beautiful tail. Big and long and black and fluffy, like a big old like dog's tail or whatever has a big fluffy tail, rabbit's tail or something, a chipmunk's tail. And Brother Bear looked at his tail and he started thinking, well, is it cold? And he goes, of course it's cold, it's ice. And then he put his tail into the hole, and he goes all day and all night, and he goes, ma. And before Brother Bear could say any more, he looked over and Coyote was already eating all of his salmon. Coyote made his trick come true. He is eating all of his salmon. And Brother Bear sat there all day. The sun went over. And he sat there all night. He watched the moon go back over too. And then finally, the next morning, Coyote was wandering around, and he could hear, "Roo, roo," and he looked. He's like, what is that? What is that? And he could hear, "Roo," and he could hear Brother Bear growling and fighting and struggling. And he's, oh yeah, my brother, I forgot he's been there all day and all night. So he ran up there, and he looked at Brother Bear, and he's sitting in the middle of the lake with his tail frozen in the ice. And he goes, oh, what's happening to you, brother? And he goes, are you sure this is going to work? Are you sure this is how to catch salmon? How to catch fish? And Brother Coyote started laughing. He's, I don't know the first thing about fishing. I let others do the feeding for me. I just eat what they catch for me. Ah! And then he started laughing and laughing. And Brother Bear got so angry he stood up. And all of a sudden, and he looked around and he couldn't find his tail. His tail was stuck in the ice. And that is the story of how Brother Bear lost his tail.
Interesting. Just so trusting.
I'm going to be right back. I got to go. Can I go?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to turn the chat back on. Kenthen has to just run. He'll be right back very shortly. So just any comments or questions for him when he arrives back, which is good. And I guess while we're waiting for him, I'm just going to do something that I normally do at the end. I just want to say that if you have any storytellers in your community that you would like, or your nation, that you think we should highlight, and because the response for today has been so positive about people wanting, and our youth wanting to hear the stories, that we do look for that type of input from communities, from school districts, from any participant that we have that are available and would like to come speak. Like I say, I was actually excited when I found Kenthen up at UBC. I happened to be up there for a meeting and knew that he had all these different acting experience and storytelling. And actually, we're family. We come from the same family, the Lina family, the Thomas family. But looking at our next and upcoming learning circles for anybody who might be interested. He will be back shortly. What's up and coming, and he will be able to answer questions. So if you have questions for him about his stories and his family, because it sounds like there are other family members that do tell the stories. There's some in the Kamloops area. Lyle, or cousin Lyle Thomas, is in the Kamloops area. Kenthen is here down going to university at UBC. He said his brother, I think, is in the Salmon Arm area. So there are storytellers there, and there's also the older generation as well. There is his dad, there is our uncle, there is my mom in the Enderby area. So upcoming learning circles, January 21st, for those interested in healing the wounded mind. We have trauma residential schools in the criminal justice system. We have Gerald Bent from Corrections Canada and Michael Pond, who is a counselor. January 23rd, feeding your family delicious foods. And most of these sessions are from 10 to 12. On January 28th, we have a presentation from Nankini Wellness Center Society, Megan Brannoni, about the challenges and what to expect when you go to treatment centers, because there is a fair amount of youth that go to the Nankini Treatment Center. Their challenges, how to help you navigating that system. February 6th, we have mental health and nutrition. So Kenthen is back. If there is any questions for him, please type those in the chat room. If there is any, there is a whole pile of chat. Could you please limit the chat to actually questions for Kenthen? Because I actually have to follow this, and it's really hard to draw out the questions. Kelly, he's back, and if you have a question for him, that would be good. February 11th, we have the BC Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, support and disability programs, what's available across the province and how to navigate that system. February 13th, we have a presentation on physical activity, and just secured yesterday, which is really interesting, is the journey of Grand Chief Doug Kelly and his turn around. He'll be sharing his story as a support to the presenters on physical activity and getting active. February 20th from 7 to 9, we have an evening series, Aboriginal Women in Law. That's a partnership with the Simon Fraser University First Nations Student Association. And March 11th, Making Sense of Lateral Violence. I have heard, and Catherine has heard, that there's a need in communities to start addressing and doing a series on wellness and making sense of lateral violence and working with that. So we have Coyote Consulting. So if there is any questions in any of the rooms or in the chat, we're moving into March. So you can see there's enough planning in the future that if anybody wanted to do a presentation, that we allow sufficient time. There is support of myself to help you. If you have an idea that if we're flushing things out, you know, the time frame of putting a presentation together. March 13th, we have early childhood nutrition with Jerry Caston. March 27th, we are going to stream our traditional foods with Suzanne Johnson from the First Nations Health Authority. Unfortunately, February, we're not able to stream her presentation. Their system went down up in Penticton, but we will be hosting that March 27th. April 10th, we have Healthy Eating for Wellness and Chronic Disease Prevention and Management with Rebecca Sovdi from FNHA. April 15th, in our series of lateral violence, we're looking at the roots of bullying, how the bully is created, and I guess tools for you to deal with that type of person. Okay, so I'm not really sure if there's any more questions or comments from any of the participants on the video chat. So, Kenthen, welcome back.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you know, the time and energy that you have taken to learn about, you know, the oral traditions, the storytelling. I just mentioned, you know, Lyle up in Kamloops area and your brothers in Salmon Arm, in that area, and, you know, your dad and your uncles and family members.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking for one more story. Oh, she's joking. But yeah, if there's any feedback that you would like to give to Kenthen, please feel free to do that. Any comments as we wrap up today's session. And I guess as I also want to say, you know, we're in the downtown Vancouver, that, you know, we're on the traditional Musqueam territory in the downtown office of downtown Vancouver, right off Granville, Hornby, and Davies. But if you have a presenter, it really doesn't, if there's a presenter in the interior that would like to do a presentation, we're able to tie in by video conference that presenter. If there's somebody that you have in mind that you would like us to be in contact with, please contact myself or Catherine. So, Kenthen, how would you like to wrap up today's session? What are your closing comments about today's session?
Just that I think that storytelling is definitely a tool that can be utilized not only for you know, to preserve the culture and the traditions and the art of storytelling itself, but it can at the same time, I think for myself personally, it went a long ways to saving, well, I guess for lack of a better term, saving myself. You know, at the time in my life when storytelling and performing arts came into my life, is that kind of that transition period when you're going from a teenager into a young man. And there's a lot of difficult choices that young people have to make, especially in Aboriginal communities. You know, you're battling against not only the transition, but you're going through the alcohol and the drugs and the you know, all of the other external factors that are weighing against you. You know, they're dealing with Aboriginal gangs and things like that. You know, and for me, I came from, you know, a pretty in where I came from North Shore Kamloops. It was a pretty atypical experience growing up. You know, there was the abuses, the sexual and the violent, and a lot of abuses that a lot of us Aboriginal kids had suffered in our community of Kamloops in the North Shore. And so to deal with those and to deal with turning into a young man, it was it was a period of transition that if it weren't for the storytelling and the performing arts and the culture that I had become in touch with, I think that transition could have been, a lot tougher, if not even fatal for me. Because there was a period in my life where, especially at that point, you start believing that no one cares about you, that there's nothing in life that really deserves for you to manage into your life. But the culture of these stories and the time that my granny, my kia, would sit me down and tell me these stories was meaningful, and it started giving me meaning in my life. And so I guess the message that I'm trying to say is that for the youth, for especially the younger ones, even if it doesn't seem like they're listening, and you tell them a story and it seems like they're kind of off in la la land and they're not listening, I think for a large part of it they are hearing, and that they will someday, maybe not right away, maybe not in your time frame, but in their time frame, it'll come to a point where it'll mean something to them, and they'll be able to take that and to use it into their life to make a better decision. So basically that's what the culture and the storytelling and all of that did for me. It helped me make better decisions in my life, whereas the rest of the kids that were in our little clique at the time, the ones that I grew up with, a lot of them ended up in jails and dead. And I think there's only 2 of us that really kind of made it through and transitioned into citizens. And the rest of them, they made decisions and they had to live with them. So yeah, the culture, the traditions, it is a strong reinforcement tool that we can use in our youth.
Thank you. You bring up a very good point, because last time when I began this position, a lot of the role models were saying the same thing about reconnecting when they come away to university or growing up. They didn't have a lot of the culture and the language and the connection. And that's the one thing that I hear role models like yourself stating time and again, is the connection to culture. How important that becomes when you go away to university. You look for the family environment, whether it's a friendship center here in the city, or other people that you can gravitate that of likeness, right? The support system, whether it's we have presentations from UBC, I hear from SFU, they have that Aboriginal, like a learning center, a gathering place where they say the culture has become so important to them. It's ingrained in us, but when we move away to go to university, that's the piece that's missing. We try and connect with those types of people, right? So, that's been a common thread amongst our youth presentations is, people talking about their success. It's the culture. It's who we are. There's a lot of comments on here, Ken, and it's thanks a lot from Stephanie. Kelly says, thank you guys. It's me, Karma, says thank you for the presentation and the stories. Go Native Power. And hey, Crystal, good stories. We've kind of run out of time. So yes, they were good stories. And Deborah is, if you ever come to Southeast BC Corner, would love to have you come to our schools. Thank you guys for sharing. My students enjoyed it. However, they disliked the chatting amongst some of the other guests. So Brandy, that's why we tried to shut down the chat room. Unfortunately, we don't get that much chatter normally. So this time we did try and scale it back. And it is kind of unfortunate, because if you had a question midstream presentation, we were trying to just turn the chat off and on to limit the amount of chatter going on. So students, hopefully, next time that you join, that there isn't a lot of side chatter, and that it is kind of distracting to some of the other participants. So yes, you're welcome, Stephanie. Yes, there is some great stories going on. So from the beautiful downtown Musqueam territory, in the heart of the downtown of Vancouver, the city we call Vancouver, thank you for joining us. We appreciate any feedback. We're coming up to year end. Any positive comments, any constructive criticism that you may have, please send myself, Crystal Morris, or our program coordinator, Catherine Berry, a message by email. So again, thank you. We say Kukstam to Kenthen. Good luck in your studies and welcome back to university. And Heichka. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Crystal and Ken. Thanks. Everybody is saying thank you. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your day. Happy Thursday, everyone.